Millions of fans were already wondering what Rafael Nadal said when he appeared on live television. Eala was deemed fortunate by Aryna Sabalenka. Nadal gave it a completely other name. You can be sure that everyone in the world paused to listen when the greatest tennis player in history chose to advocate for a 20-year-old Filipino girl. Because what transpired next generated a firestorm rather than merely a debate. And since then, the tennis world has changed. This is not just a tennis story, so stay tuned. It is about one girl who earned everything she has, respect, and her legacy. Whether the world's top player wants to acknowledge it or not. You must first comprehend Eala's identity and, more crucially, her background in order to comprehend why this moment is so poignant. Because no one was given this story. In the small Spanish village of Mallorca, this tale was constructed brick by brick, loss after loss, and morning by morning. The Rafael Nadal Academy is located there. And that's where a 12-year-old Filipino girl arrived with a racket, an ambition, and no assurances that any of it would ever succeed. The Philippines' cousin city is where Alexandra Eala was born. She wasn't descended from tennis royalty. Unlike several of the European prodigies, she was not expedited into the system. She spent years honing her footwork, her left-handed serve, and her ability to read a match like a chess grandmaster rather than a power hitter after earning a position at the Rafa Nadal Academy via sheer talent. In 2022, she was the US Open Girls Singles Champion. However, the WTA Tour was a whole other world. The doors continued to close for a long time. Grand Slam qualifying round exits with a ranking much outside the top 100. The kind of chilly, unappreciative period in a tennis career where the majority of players quietly give up. 6 big qualifying losses. 6. And yet she continued. Then came Miami 2025, which had a global ranking of 140 and was a wild card entry. She was not given a real chance by anyone outside of the Philippines. However, her purpose in coming to Miami was not to survive. She was here to make a point. She defeated previous Roland Garros champion Aryna Sabalenka. The current Australian Open champion, Madison Keys, was defeated by her. She then effortlessly defeated world number 2 Agatic 62-75 in one of the most stunning upsets in WTA 1000 history. The Miami crowd screamed as Eala remarked, "I'm just in disbelief right now. I'm so happy and so blessed to be able to compete with such a player on this stage," in her en-court interview following the beating. Her eyes were big and her voice was shaking. From Manila to Miami to Madrid, the Filipino diaspora, dispersed over stadiums, living rooms, and phone screens, erupted more loudly. The man who taught her everything experienced a surge of pride that he was unable to contain while watching from home in Spain. But hold on, what was Aryna Sabalenka doing during this whole ordeal? That's where the story takes its first unexpected turn, so stay with us. The problem with Aryna Sabalenka is as follows. She is among the WTA Tour's most brutally honest, unvarnished, and straightforward players. She is charming in part because of that. For the past few years, she has been one of the most captivating figures in women's tennis because of her unadulterated, fire-breathing authenticity. She expresses her opinions. She doesn't sugarcoat things, and you usually respect that. However, before the mind catches up, that same unfiltered mouth occasionally fires. Sabalenka was questioned explicitly about Eala's breakthrough performance in Miami during a live television panel discussion, a post-tournament broadcast roundtable with current and previous players. It was an easy question. Sabalenka's response was anything but. She gave a shrug. She grinned. Then she uttered the words that would reverberate for weeks. The fact that Eala's Liami prevailed felt less about anything genuinely exceptional and more about chance and the draw. Considering how Fiat was playing that day, the beating should not be overstated. That although Eala's level was encouraging, being dominant and promising were two very different things. That the tour would change. That once the best players had footage of Eala, she would struggle. Was it a vicious personal attack now? No. Was the framing dismissive? Of course. Because Sabalenka spoke reverently about her own Miami Open title, which she won in a dominant manner by defeating Pigula 75-62 in the final, when she was asked about it during that same interview. She talked about putting in a lot of effort, managing stress, and earning everything she deserved. Nevertheless, the word luck was selected when discussing a 19-year-old who had just defeated a 5-time Grand Slam champion while playing injured in the semifinals as a wild card and ranked 140th in the world. It was instantly picked up by the internet. Clips spread in a matter of hours. Eala is currently the biggest attraction in women's tennis, according to former player Sam Querrey, who made this claim on the Nothing Major podcast. Bigger than Sabalenka, bigger than golf. Steve Johnson had compared her effect to Xiao Fana. And now the world #1 was sitting on live television calling it luck. The comment was heard in every corner of the globe, especially in one because in Spain in Mallorca, a retired champion was watching and he had a few things to say. Rafael Nadal does not do drama. That is important to understand. In 22 Grand Slam titles worth of a career, the man almost never threw shade. He did not subtweet. He did not do press conference warfare. He was the kind of champion who won through action, not words. This is exactly why what he did next hit so differently. First came the social media post, a res hair of Eala's in-court interview in Miami, the moment she broke down following her semi-final loss against Pegula. Tears in her eyes, voice cracking as she informed the gathering she had given every single thing she had. Nadal reshared it. No caption needed. The message was absolutely clear. This girl is not lucky. This chick is wonderful. But that was not the moment that broke the internet. The event occurred during a live broadcast, a Spanish sports program in which Nadal was featured as a guest commentator. He was asked about Eala's rise, about her potential, about the mentorship he had offered to her since she was 12 years old. He spoke about her with clear pride. He remembered the first time he had messaged her, or rather the first time she had messaged him following Miami. For the first time in his life, he had personally contacted her through a private message. She claimed that her phone was so overloaded with notifications that even Rafa's message was overlooked, thus she didn't notice it for days. Then, without being asked, the presenter brought up Sabalenka's remarks on television, the story of her good fortune, and the idea that the situation and draw had elevated Eala above her true level. Nadal hesitated. He didn't grin. He looked straight into the camera and said something along the lines of, "Nobody who beats Egate 62-75 as a wild card ranked 140th in the world is lucky. That is not luck. That is preparation. That is courage. And that is talent. I believe that when people suggest otherwise, they are not being fair to a young woman who has worked her entire life for this." He did not specifically mention Sabalenka. He didn't need to. Every journalist in the room, every home viewer, and every fan who clipped and shared the video in a matter of minutes were all aware of the particular person he was addressing. In less than 48 hours, the video received 10 million views. Every platform was overrun with Filipino fans. Journalists covering tennis from all across the world offered their opinions. Even though Sabalenka's remark was dismissive at the time, it became the headline of every major sports publication on the planet. And since the story was only getting started, this is where it becomes more complex. One of the most heated fan-driven disputes in women's tennis history ensued. Because there was more to this than a single remark and retort. This turned into a much larger issue. Regarding who is respected in women's tennis, how emerging talent from non-traditional tennis markets is viewed, and whether the incumbent elite feel at ease with the prospect of being displaced. The tennis world had never witnessed the fury with which the Filipino community mobilized. John Na, a former American professional, had already stated it clearly. On the women's side of the game, they have a star at last. Some enormous markets have unrealized potential. All they need is for players to show up and establish themselves. And Alex has done just that. Every AA match was an event thanks to the Filipino fanbase that spans Southeast Asia, the US, Europe, and the Middle East. There are only standing rooms in Miami, Dubai, and Australia. They were now standing in a new manner. Within hours, the hashtags were all over Twitter. At the same time, hashtag #RespectAya became popular in Spain, the Philippines, and the US. Social media was used by former professionals. Aya had won 25 break points in the tournament. Her return game was rated among the best in Miami that week, and she had forced Pegula to 3 exhausting sets while playing with a strapped thigh and a mid-match ankle turn. Journalists covering the Miami Open wrote in-depth pieces explaining why Aya's run was the farthest thing from fortunate. Supporters of Sabalenka retaliated in the meantime. They contended that she had not been malevolent, that she was merely providing an honest competitive evaluation, that she had complimented Aya in previous interviews, and that the internet had taken a subtle remark and transformed it into a villainous storyline for the world number one. And that was also true. Because Sabalenka is not a bad guy. She is a contender, one of the best in the world, and a player who has weathered her own storms, controversies, and public criticism while emerging stronger and more determined. She was more familiar than most with what it was like to have your accomplishments called into doubt. However, the internet was unable to let go of the idea of understanding what it feels like and then doing it to someone else. That blind gap, that paradox. Furthermore, the story solidified in the lack of any public clarification from Sabalenka. Now that everyone was watching, the question was what would happen next. The entire talk would be defined by what transpired next. This is what Eala failed to do. On social media, she refrained from retaliating. She did not criticize the world number one at a press conference. She didn't act dramatic. She didn't have to. Rather, she traveled to Eastbourne and qualified for a WTA final. She attended the US Open and became the first Filipino player to win a Grand Slam main draw singles match. She defeated Clara Tolson 76 in the third set, 13-11 in the breaker, after rallying from a 15-point deficit in the third set. Not fortunate, not coincidental. High-level competition from a 20-year-old who is still figuring out who she is. She sobbed during her in-court interview following her devastating loss to Maya Joint in the Eastbourne final, despite possessing match points. Nadal also posted that video because it showed a young woman crying not out of weakness but rather because of how much she had committed and how deeply she cared. It was more poignant than any retort could possibly be. Then, in 2026, she entered a WTA 1000 event as a seeded player for the first time, ranked 31st in the world. She was defeating Jasmine Paolini, making it to the quarterfinals, and attracting standing room-only audiences at every place by the time the Dubai Open rolled around. She spoke candidly at her press conference following a crushing loss to Coco Gauff 60-62 in the Dubai quarterfinals. In the end, I still lag behind Coco and other players of her caliber in terms of skill. Just accountability, clarity, and the kind of self-awareness that champions possess. No spin, no excuses. This girl wasn't riding her luck. This girl was doing the hard, unglamorous work of bridging the gap, and she understood exactly where she stood. Eventually, and Sabalenka thoughtfully and succinctly addressed the controversy, admitting that her remarks may have come out as harsher than she had intended. She refrained from offering a formal apology. Depending on who you ask, that may or may not have been sufficient. However, the prevailing narrative had already been formed by Nadal's response, that moment on live television, and the evidence had supported it match by match, point by point. There was one last question, and it was the most important of them. What is the true meaning of this story? Because it is too simple to conclude that a budding star is being defended by a well-known legend. The surface is that the tennis community has been secretly battling this issue for years, but Eala's ascent has now brought it to light. Geographical issues have always plagued women's tennis. A limited corridor of Europe and North America typically produces the players who control the discourse, marketing deals, prime time slots, and magazine covers. It is referred to as talent when a player from that route emerges. It must be explained when a Southeast Asian player climbs from a wild card place to defeat 3 Grand Slam winners. It must be put in perspective. The adjective lucky must be used to qualify it. Nadal was aware of this. He didn't say it in those exact words. He didn't have to. However, he made a statement about what respect looks like in tennis and what it looks like when it is lacking during that live television moment. Since she was 12, he had seen this girl train. He had witnessed her defeat. He had witnessed her self-reflection. He had witnessed her stay. Following Miami, he had sent her a private message, the first one he had ever sent her. Because he understood the significance of that run for tennis itself as well as for her and the Philippines. Eala was essential to the sport. The standing room-only audiences in Dubai, Miami, and Australia, as well as the courtside electricity, were necessary. That unadulterated, intensely personal investment of a whole country witnessing one of their own on the international scene. When he likened Eala's effect to Jafenska's pole on the men's side,